Marcy's party, or no, sorry, party, I like I just would have, if it were my choice, I would never go home. I didn't want to come home until like everybody was done. Yeah, I think once the party was over,
And then we have to do web posting. Mine was
okay. That is weird. Your dad said that you can't spend a day in the sun. Laugh about it. That was the weekend run. That was your rich? I can say that we're young. I mean, I can say you're the one. You can say it too. But I can say that we're young. We're deaf, but they don't know. We should get a sail off into sunset.
is the railroad.
But this, no, this is it. Are we still going? I'm kind of lost. Oh, you didn't know that less is more. No, it's kind of kid. I don't know if that's different from what I did. I wonder if you get a better shot. I don't know. What you guys doing?
Still working on this. Did you have a question?
No, I was saying I was done.
Oh, okay.
Did you say?
Yeah, I asked you was still working.
Oh, I was gonna say
But
who's
it's all
done.
good.
It wasn't that long.
Same school.
Yeah. It's like a bring up, let go.
I know Andrew Cartney is this.
So bad. Oh, this is a.
Alright, guys.
It's funny if she gets highlighted
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. You guys can kind of like finish up the quiz if you need to. Alright, so now we're gonna kind of move into like specifically the progressive era. Pretty much around like 1900 to 1910, okay? So that's just kind of like the time frame that we're working with right now. Alright, so learning objectives for today, we're going to describe the major reforms that occurred during the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt and how it affects our lives today. Understand the role that Theodore Roosevelt played in the progressive era. So pretty similar learning objectives, just a little different. Okay. So, yesterday we did the little balloon activity, kind of talking about working conditions in this time. So, for those of you guys who did like blow up all those balloons, let's see, it was Sierra, Chloe.
I'm protesting the working conditions because they were bad and I feel underpaid.
What do you mean they were bad?
We were forced to blow up balloons.
Hey, you're just one.
Actually, she asked for volunteers.
Sterling did not
I did not volunteer.
volunteer.
I got volunteered by Max.
I was like,
but-
Banana Boy would love to do it. And then he said,
I was
there you go.
But, okay, yeah, so there were a couple things that may have been a little bit unfair about the activity. So one, it was definitely low pay for those of you guys who are actually like doing the work. Me, on the other hand, I benefited greatly. I mean, I got paid pretty well for the amount of work that I had to do.
Oh, that's why we popped all the balloons so you couldn't sell them.
Actually, I just couldn't fit them in my car. Okay, and then on top of that, if you guys have been doing it for like hours on end, someone definitely would have passed out, at least one person, and you probably would get a little bit bored of just blowing up balloons. So kind of what we talked about yesterday, If someone were to pass out, you guys would be replaced. Like, there's enough people, we'll just replace you. So we're gonna kind of relate that back to the working conditions during this time. So unsafe, there's no compensation for injury. So if someone passes out and they like hit their head, that's not on me. So
I didn't tell you.
you get a finger cut off in one of the factories, that's not, it's fine. Yeah, I don't want to go into more details. Okay, Sterling.
How many people died or got seriously injured during that progressive era due to bad working conditions?
A lot. I don't know an exact number, but it was definitely a big number considering like how horrible the working conditions were and just how little people cared about whether or not their workers were getting injured. Yes, I can't give you an exact number, but it's definitely a big number. So on top of that, you had really long hours. Most people working in factories would work like 10, 12 hours, 6 days a week at least. At low pay, so those of you guys got 10 cents per balloon. That was great for you guys.
Right.
You still have to pay.
And I don't have money.
Well, I mean, because you get like 10 cents and then you lose 10%.
Okay, but on top of that, because it's such low pay, everyone in the family had to get a job just to make it. So dad was working, mom was working, and kids were working. Yeah, this was your question?
So, because like, look, it's long hours, you have no pay, it's hard labor and repetitive mind.
Well, there's a reason for that. School was designed in this time, and then it never
Exactly.
changed.
School is pretty much just torture, but
If
education.
we can call it unsafe due to recent events.
School, let's see.
There were a couple of shootings that's kind of unsafe.
Hey, I wasn't gonna say the word, but Alex just said it.
I don't care. I'm just worried about the listeners.
Okay, but the difference, yeah, Addie, right? Okay, Addie did make a comment. We do kind of pay to be here. Maybe it's not you guys, but parents pay for you
Yeah,
guys.
So we have to.
So we get paid.
So you guys don't get paid, but you get paid in knowledge. Long hours, you guys are not here for 12 hours a day.
Counter argument, we have homework for 45 hours.
Wait till college.
Oh, I'm already taking
I don't understand, guys.
I'm doing several.
Okay, alright, moving on from the school idea. Alright, so women and children paid less than men. We can kind of argue that's still an issue today. Hard labor, a lot of the jobs weren't easy. I mean, these guys were working in coal mills, or coal mines. They were working in really dangerous factories, working in like food processing. So it was difficult jobs and they were getting paid very little for it. Repetitive mind-numbing tasks, again, if you guys were blowing up balloons for hours on end, you guys would get bored of it. People doing like little like assembly line type things, you get bored of it pretty quick. And then huge economic disparities between workers and big business owners, okay? Oh, as I am going through this, I forgot to mention that paper that I passed out, you guys should fill it out as you go, okay? It doesn't have to be like super detailed, just take notes, like I can see that you guys are understanding. Yes, let me grab one for you. Okay.
Oh, goodness gracious.
All right.
Oh, I figured it out.
Okay, moving on. Okay, so kind of going back to the child labor activity or assignment that you guys did last week. What did you guys learn? For those of you who have done it. Veronica?
Well, the working conditions were not great, and the one that I did, so the, like the pictures, all of the children that were being photographed knew that they were being photographed just because of the equipment that photographers have.
Kind of hard to miss like the giant.
Yeah, but, like, regardless, like, they weren't able to, like, change their working conditions even for the face of a picture.
Yeah.
And they just, like, they were in really horrible conditions, and it seemed like nobody cared.
So they're very like raw images. I mean, the things that they're capturing, they're not really altering it very much to kind of show what's going on. So yeah, like during this time, photographs, especially like Civil War time, photographs kind of took off and they became a lot more like common. And so people are seeing that there's a lot of issues with child labor, and they're seeing the conditions that these kids are kind of like put under to work and everything. Okay, does anyone else have anything you want to add to child labor? I feel like it's pretty straight up children who are laboring. Okay. What? Well, it was the wrong side. Well, I'm just gonna come back here real quick.
This slide could not load.
Well, we'll show it anyway. It's probably this. Alright, so we're gonna kind of talk about labor unions and how those were formed because of all these issues. So because of issues with really long hours, low pay, horrible working conditions, labor unions started to kind of form. I was going to show the video, but we're not going to go through all that. It's like a 2-minute video. If you guys really want to see it, you can go back to the slides. But labor unions, they started to form around like the 1860s, if I remember right. But they really took off like around this progressive era, Gilded Age, when people were seeing more of the issues and they were actually like feeling confident enough to gather together and like take a stand for what's going on. So I have a couple questions. What or should governments regulate businesses to protect the rights of workers? What do you guys think?
To some degree,
Yeah, to a
yes.
degree.
Yeah.
Because working conditions and the pay has gotten
More education.
better.
Yeah.
It's also, it's now safe enough that they're not having to file reports and stuff, or just people aren't getting hurt on the job without a big investigation going on.
So like you guys are saying, governments should probably regulate a little bit. They need to have some kind of say because, I mean, who's gonna stand up for the little guys if the big businessmen are controlling everything? Veronica, go ahead.
Well, just without that regulation, like there are a lot larger gaps between the classes because someone who doesn't need a job to survive is a lot more willing to advocate for themselves than someone who needs this job who can't afford to lose it.
That's a
So if
really
they're
good
gonna go
point.
talk to their boss and say, hey, I can't work 18 hours today, sorry.
Yeah.
Like they can't, someone who needs a job probably isn't as willing to say that.
Yeah,
as
you
someone
can't
who-
stand up to yourself. I mean, like people who are having like injuries, they couldn't exactly go to their boss and say, hey man, I just cut off my finger, I gotta go to the doctor. Because that person would lose their job instantly and they'd be quickly replaced because there were a ton of people coming into the US, a lot of immigrants looking for other jobs, and so they were gonna be replaced pretty easily. So the workers couldn't really stand up for themselves.
Especially where we live, like most of our youth, they work in small businesses, or own
Yeah.
small businesses. So like the way that the government handles our businesses is completely different than how they should and do handle big corporations.
Yeah. So there's also that side of it where does the line come in with like big businesses versus small businesses? And that's something that like, you know, I feel like we've kind of been dealing with for the past forever. Yeah. Okay, so how do citizens individually and collectively influence government policy? Chloe, what do you think?
Can you say your question again?
How do citizens individually and collectively influence government policy?
If they complain about different matters that have importance to them, then the government can do different things according to that.
Yeah, really good. Okay.
Strikes were a massive thing. So there were a whole bunch of strikes where like tens of thousands of people would just not come to work. And that's a big issue if you're trying to run a business, because if no one's there to run your business goes out of business.
Okay.
So collectively, when everyone went on strike, they had a big issue with trying to get stuff done as a company, and that's when they realized that the unions were legit and they actually had to negotiate with the unions for fair rights.
Awesome. We're gonna come back to a really good example of that. But yeah, so collectively they found that like they actually had a say, or they at least had some kind of power against like the business owners. Okay? Alright, what did the labor movement accomplish?
Led to like several laws being made about like child labor and other organizations.
Yeah. Yep. So labor movement meant that some child labor laws were passed, working condition, or working regulations. What? Minimum wage. Yeah. So any of those are good answers. Okay. All right. So we're gonna kind of move to Teddy Roosevelt, nicknamed the Rough Rider. So when he was about 26, his wife and his mother died unexpectedly on the same day. So really bad luck for that guy. Then he returned to his ranch in the Dakota Territory for a couple years, and then he came back to New York and he entered politics again. So he was in politics. His wife and mom died, went back to Dakota, and then he came back to politics. So positions that he held, he was a police commissioner, assistant secretary of the Navy, Rough Rider. Pretty much what that means is that during like the Cuban independence revolution down there, the U.S. sent a military down to help the Cubans gain independence, and he was like a part of the first U.S. volunteer cavalry, famous for fighting in Cuba. And then he was also vice president and president. Okay? Alright, so he was elected as vice president in 1901. At the time, the position didn't really hold a ton of power. And then President McKinley was assassinated, and he became president like 6 months afterwards. So he goes from a position of like, you know, vice president, it's pretty powerful, but I mean, compared to a lot of other things, you don't have that much of a say. And then as president, he did a lot. We'll kind of talk about that. So we're going to talk the coal strike of 1902. So this one, pretty similar to what Sterling was saying about big strikes that were starting to happen. So the Pennsylvania coal miners, there were 150,000 of them who went on strike for higher wages, shorter hours, and recognition of their union.
It's hard to replace 150,000 guys.
Yeah, so because it's so hard to replace 150,000 guys who are working difficult jobs, winter was starting to get closer, and people were realizing that like coal wasn't being produced and manufactured and sold. And so all of a sudden people are getting worried because like winter's getting closer and it's going to get cold, and they don't have any way to heat up their homes. And so it led to like a bunch of different issues, conflict between the business owner and the workers, because the big business owners said that like the unions don't really matter. Like they just weren't really willing to give in. They pretty much just threatened to replace all of them and just move on. Another thing is that during this time, Roosevelt, he definitely wanted them. He saw that people were complaining about like the lack of mine or lack of coal, and so he stepped in and he urged mine owners and the workers to accept arbitration, which is just like a settlement. And workers accepted, but the owners refused. So a lot of people were like, a lot of the big politicians, business owners were saying like, let's send in the military. Let's send in the military and disband the union, because if the military comes in, the union, like they can't do anything against the military. Teddy Roosevelt, on the other hand, he was like, yeah, let's send in the military, but let's back the union. So a little bit of a change there. Rather than siding like with big businessmen, all of a sudden the president was supporting the workers. So he threatened to take over the mines if the owners didn't agree to some kind of settlement, and it was the first time that the federal government had actually intervened in the strike. in the interest of the public. So rather than caring about the big politicians and businessmen, he was more concerned about the workers, the unions. And this made him very popular in the eyes of the public. Eventually, they did come to a conclusion. They came to a settlement, and they worked for shorter work day and higher pay, and they didn't require the mining companies to recognize the union. So it was a little bit of a compromise where the company didn't necessarily have to recognize a union, but they did have to give in to certain conditions. Okay? So that leads to Theodore Roosevelt's idea of the square deal, which became Roosevelt's campaign slogan after the success of the coal strike. And when he was running again, I think it was like 2004, I don't have it there, I think it was 2004. He promised to see that each is given a square deal because he is entitled to no more and should receive no less. So when he says each, he's talking like all the workers, all the people, not just like the big people in the background. And he revealed, it kind of reveals like Teddy's belief that the need for workers, business, and consumers should be balanced. He wants these other people to have some kind of say. Yeah, so we're gonna read a little bit more about the square deal. And I'm gonna have you guys work on this worksheet. So it's got the, if I have more, I'll come back and give you guys another one. It has the, like an excerpt, I can't say those. Excerpt, right? You guys all know what I'm talking about. From the square deal. And then I'm just gonna have you guys answer the questions that are at the bottom. Okay, and then on the back of the paper that I gave you guys, make sure that you guys each write out the answers, okay? I've got two more.
We can keep our government on a safe and healthy basis. We can make and keep our social system what it used to be, only on condition of judging each man, not as a member of class, but on his worth as a man. It is an infamous thing in our married life, and fundamentally treacherous to our institutions, to apply any men on that test, save as more personal worth, or to draw between any distinction, save this distinction that marks those who do well and widely from those ill and foolish. These are good citizens and bad citizens in the class, as in locality. And the attitude of distant people towards great public and social programs should be determined not by the accidental questions about locality, but by those deep programs which
our social system where it should be.
the family
Only upon condition of working constitution, not a member of class, spawn is one as a man. It is infamous. It is an infamous thing in our American life, and fundamentally treacherous.
Many Republicans ratified the Constitution
have always proved fatal.
the mission of this government as being
Or
In a view of Republican government,
war as such as its rich as such, in fact, fatal to our republic.
as soon as it
As
becomes
such failure and such nation have always been fatal in the past
we must act to form
A healthy Republican government must rest upon
there must
individuals,
ever be present in our
not
lives
upon classes or sections.
that in
As soon
republics
as it becomes government by class or by section, the rights will also
Not by accidental questioning.
because he's engaged in one occasion or another. Yes, words
Act on the motto of
we must
the motto of all for and for all.
we
There
must
must
see
be
that this is
ever
a
present in our
square
minds
deal.
the fundamental
Because he's
principle of a republic
no
is
more
that
than
the only safety is to stand neither
But
the
we
nor
must keep ever in mind that a republic such as ours is constituted by virtue of orderly liberty, which constitutes the domination of the law over all mankind, and through its administration in such resolute fashion as shall be that no man in the republic is
must be given a square deal because he is entitled to no more and to receive no less.
According to Roosevelt, the judge only
Sweet. Finally, we have kept over in mind that our public supervised consists only by virtue of orderly movement, which comes from the equal domination of law over all men alike. Parents of administration in such resolute fashion as shall preach no man of other to the So, according to Roosevelt, how should we judge individuals? We should judge them by principles.
Before you do, we have to turn this in. Do we have to have a separate
No.
Make sure that you guys are writing your responses on the back of this paper.
Upon their class.
That paper? Yeah, because this one we're gonna turn in, and then I'll get back to you guys tomorrow.
Oh.
So, yeah, and so just make sure that each of you guys are like writing your responses. It's totally fine. Yeah, just wanted to catch you guys before you guys got too far.
And what?
Second paragraph. Roosevelt describes the United States government as Republican is more for a stronger government than, right?
I think it means more of the idea of it being a government for the public.
Fatal to a republic. Oh, wait. Such bad.
That's what it
So what does Republican mean in this?
Okay. I gotta look at it. So, really, it's just like, okay, we prove fatal to our republic as such failure and such. Does any help with this one too? Yeah. Okay, as such failure and such recognition have always proven fatal in the past to other republics. So it's comparing like this republic to republics in the past. You guys think of like republics in the past?
So what does Republic mean though? Because the second question says like
what does it mean?
It says, what does he mean by the term Republican? Like,
What he means by it is for.
What do you think?
Have you ever seen Star Wars?
Yes, I have.
Representatives.
Okay. That's getting somewhere.
Is there a stronger government? That's more.
So representatives.
A government for people.
Okay, so you guys are like getting really close. So like representatives, you can think of like Rome. Like
Yeah.
because like representative, they want it to be like more of the people rather than just like big business. Okay, so republic in this case means more like for the people. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
What is your question?
Jesus, I think I just think it's the perfect choice. It's great. It's like black.
A lot of the laws are still used to American ideal. Okay, so it's different than the
Right here, Roosevelt means president.
as soon as it's
Neither of you read number 3. You guys just left me in the dark.
Well, then read that.
I can't see it from here.
Okay.
According to Roosevelt.
Can we just round up to 3 minutes?
No, we're gonna do 2.
Well,
Thank you for
So
asking.
2 minus.
I don't know.
what do you think? Write it down.
I don't know. I didn't process what you had read in the freaking article.
Okay, so
The first question is popular.
a healthier individuals. Because really what a republic is versus an individual. So if a republic is versus individuals, then a republic can't really function. It's not a republic.
So, in order for a government to support these people, it has to recognize the work of
Not.
He is entitled to no more choice.
I could see it.
No, I don't think I did.
I want to watch that movie.
That would feel more like
I did.
that would feel more like that.
Stop it. We're gonna finish it.
I think that's what they do. It's like, why was it?
Now it is now it is God is one that sort of garbage.
Oh, bro, Roman read stuff. If you ever read the manual, it's really weird. It's really weird.
That's what it is. It's similar.
This person, this person, they're also related this way.
It's all family.
Yeah.
And then horse is
I also think we do it like.
Alright guys, so let's come together as a class and we're gonna kind of review these really quick, okay?
Deserves equal treatment. Or deserves treatment. Okay, so each man deserves treatment.
Alright, so question number 1. According to Roosevelt, how should we judge individuals?
By their personal work.
By their personal worth. Okay? By their own merit? What does that mean?
What they have to offer,
Okay.
not their situation.
Like a merit badge. Very good. Alright. Question number 2. This one was a little bit more difficult. In the second paragraph of the excerpt, I don't know why I struggle so much with that. Roosevelt describes the United States government as a Republican government. What does he mean by the term Republican? Brody. Okay. Focuses more on like the individuals. Very good. More of a representative government. Awesome. Okay, yeah. So rather than like the big politicians, and they want to represent the little people, the individuals. They want to give the individuals a say. Okay. Number 3, according to Roosevelt, who or why must a healthy Republican government rest upon individuals? So why is it important that it's up to the individuals? Yeah, Logan.
Because that's American. That's how the Americans do it. That's how they've done it since the beginning. It literally says it. As soon as it becomes a government by a class or section, it departs from the old American idea.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll add on to that and say the Republican government is of the people, and as soon as the elites take control, then the government will fall apart.
Yeah, it's no longer of the people if it's just the elites. Okay?
I think Trump's presidency is this is a real bullshit way that it comes from. If you look at Trump's presidency, like it was like irritating to the economy, and that's why the little people, the small businesses did so well. That's why our economy did so well here, because of our labor functions.
Okay, that's a good perspective. Okay. Then question number 4. What does Roosevelt mean when he declares that Americans must see that each is given a square deal? What does he mean by square deal? Let's come to this table.
He said that he just means that they should each be like a fair chance, like don't frame like judge them based on like their social classes or like what they're going to do, but like judge them based on their character.
Okay, yeah, so again, going back to like, judge them off of like who they are as individuals. Like let them be people. Okay, very good. So, no, go back here. Alright, so moving on to the jungle. So, none of you guys are seniors, right? You guys are sophomores, juniors?
My grandma's a
Okay.
citizen.
Okay, so when I was a senior, I had to read this in like the government class, and I don't know if you guys are still required to read it. I don't think that you are.
1984.
I think that they changed it.
It's like 1984.
Yeah, I read 1984 and then this one, but I think that they changed the jungle because it's a little graphic. Okay, so The Jungle was written by Upton Sinclair in 1906, and the New York Post, kind of as a response to this book, they said, Mary had a little lamb, and when she saw it sickened, she shipped it off to Practicum, and now it's labeled chicken.
I've heard of both ways.
So, a little extreme, Chloe, your face. It's a lot. So, okay, does anyone have like a really good like reading voice that wants to read?
Kedrin does.
Oh, good.
Kedrin does.
I love it when
I love it when Kedrin. Would you read for us? Would you read?
All right. Okay, I'm gonna have Kedrin read a section from the jungle. I'm just gonna have you read like from here to here, okay? All right. So everyone listen, and I want you guys to like really imagine what this was like, okay? Because this is a lot.
When Upton Sinclair published The Jungle in 1906, he meant to open America's eyes to the plight of workers in the filthy, dangerous Chicago stockyards. Instead, popular outrage focused on the wider research and threat of spoiled meat. Congress quickly passed the nation's first legislation, regulating the meat, food, and drug industries. Sinclair, disappointed by his failure to provoke more sympathy for the overworked, underpaid workers, noted, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." There was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for the sausage. There would be meat that had been tumbled out onto the floor, in the dirt and sawdust, where the workers had tramped and spit uncounted billions of consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race out upon it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dried dung rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, then the rats, bread, and the meat would go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story, and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat, even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate the dinner, and so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled into the sausage. There were butt ends of smoked meat, and the scraps of corned beef, and all the odds and ends of the waste of the plants that would be dumped into old barrels in the cellar and left there. Under the system of rigid economy which the packers enforced, there were some jobs that it only paid to do once in a long time, and among these was the cleaning out of waste barrels. Every spring they did it, and in the barrels would be dirt and rust and old nails and stale water. And cartload after cartload would be taken up and dumped into the hoppers with fresh meat and sent out to the public's breakfast.
All right. So, what are your guys' initial thoughts of that? Not very hungry. You guys glad that you guys have already had lunch? Yeah. So, what were some of the like specifics that you guys kind of took of that? Like, what was going on in these like packaging places?
Lots of icky stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The Piekers here.
No quality control. I mean, there were rats hanging around. Well, I mean, if you didn't know what it was, then I mean, it wasn't a huge deal. But so that kind of idea is why this book was actually so important, because this book was written and then everyone suddenly, their eyes were open to what was actually happening in the food production industry. They were like, what the heck have I been eating? He didn't work, he was a journalist. And so he went in and he kind of like studied it and like interviewed a bunch of these people and then published this to kind of like get it out to the public. So he wrote this. Yeah, so he wrote this to like kind of talk about working conditions as well as like the horrible food conditions going on. Okay. So so Teddy Roosevelt, when he read this, he obviously saw that it was a big problem. Okay, he definitely saw that it was a huge problem that was going on, and he kind of took it as like, I'm gonna step in and we gotta do something about it. So a muckraker, which is pretty much what Upton Sinclair was, he was like an American writer who provided these detailed, accurate journalistic accounts of the political and economic corruption and social hardships caused by big businessmen. So he was like a political and economic writer. Okay, and then Teddy Roosevelt just decided, yeah, like this needs to be done. Okay, so problems with the food industry, as we kind of read, a lot of the companies would add substances to food to make it appear fresh. Churning like spoiled butter with skim milk would make it look better. Formaldehyde was added to old eggs to take away the gross odor. Unsafe chemicals were added, or unsafe chemical additives were put into foods.
What do their eggs smell like?
I don't want to
Formaldehyde takes away the odor.
Yeah, so if it's that bad that formaldehyde has to do something. Yeah. So how many of you guys really want to like live during this time? You know, have a hamburger.
I want to have a hamburger. I want to get
Yeah, Chicago, like the reason that they kind of picked Chicago is Chicago is like a main, like meat packaging city. Yep, so Midwest. Alright, so it led to the Pure Food and Drug Act. So it was passed in 1906. It prohibited the sale of misbranded or adulterated food and drugs in interstate commerce. It meant that they couldn't manufacture or transport food and medicine that had harmful ingredients, such as like rats. And food and medicine now had to carry ingredient labels, and it laid a foundation for the Food and Drug Administration. And then on top of that, the Meat Inspection Act was also passed, and it just required federal government inspection of meat that was shipped across state lines. So all of a sudden, people like had to be aware of what was actually going into the food that they were consuming.
This whole thing just sounded like pink sauce.
Were you guys still working on it? Alright, so we only have like 5 minutes left. We're gonna see how far we can get. Okay, so another thing that Teddy Roosevelt was really known for. 2 minutes? Okay. Yeah, we'll see how far we can get. Another thing that Teddy Roosevelt was known for was land conservation. So he had always had a really like a big love of the outdoors, and one of the things that he was like big into was setting aside land for like national parks and stuff. National parks had already been established by the time that Teddy Roosevelt had entered the presidency, but Teddy Roosevelt like helped expand the program. Okay, so like Yellowstone, it was I guess not necessarily created, but like it was created as a national park in 1872. Yosemite was 1890. Mesa Verde. Yep, Verde. Was 1906, and so like this just kind of shows that it just kind of grew once Teddy Roosevelt took office. So his accomplishments: he set aside 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reservations, 4 national game reserves, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, 24 reclamation projects, 7 conservation conferences and commissions. I don't know for sure if he went to South America. I would assume so, because I also know that he did go to Africa and hunted like 11,000 animals, and so I would assume he probably went down to South America as well. Okay, so we'll come back and talk a little bit. Yeah, so yeah, he did go to South America, I guess. So we're gonna talk foreign policy in a second, or tomorrow. So we'll come back and we'll talk about like his foreign policies and finish this one up. Okay. Exit ticket, you guys don't worry about it. Just hand me the papers that you guys wrote on your way out, okay?
What if we get finished?
It's okay.
Yeah, if you didn't finish that bottom section, it's totally fine. I'll just take this and I'll hand it back to you guys tomorrow, okay? Alright.
Oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
I have a question about
Newspaper says it's worse.
I have a set of I don't know because I'm so like
Figure it out.
so it was like during and like right after the test, and I use it or I
That'll be okay. That's yeah.
Wake up, you need to make money.
Miss Sarah, like she's.
Thank you.
You guys have all your grades in? You guys haven't been absent? Like last week or anything? Sam says it's supposed to snow from like Thursday, or Saturday to Thursday.
Oh my, that's awesome.
I'm so excited for snow.
How did class go? Oh, Target Valley.
Alright, thank you, Max.
That's real good. See you next. Hey, get the sweatshirt stuff.
Hey, it was good. Did everything done? We covered like all the big stuff. Yeah. So all I have to do tomorrow is just like the end of the presidency.
Yeah, now I haven't even started.
Okay. There were a few students who finished that like the speed dating activity thing.
Okay.
And I'll show you how to get out of it.
That in where we're taking attendance, but it's in a different section. So, if we do the quiz, that, do you have one other thing to grade?
Um,
Can we grade
yeah, I
that?
was gonna grade this one.
Perfect, just as long as you have 3 things in grade.
Yeah.
And Chloe did not say anything to you about making up any work. This Chloe Bristol.
She came and grabbed the Robert and she hasn't told me if she's finished yet. So I'll
No, that's
I'll
okay,
ask her
as long as
tomorrow.
she's getting it. It's a hard line, because you don't want to like punish them by not babying them, but did Brody do it then too?
I'm assuming he did, he didn't just say show me, I'll ask him about it tomorrow.
Because they usually run together, they do their papers.
Your room is so much cooler.
Is yours like a stifling?
It is so hot in my room.
Oh.
People are sweating. I'm like,
That kid, Wiley, is he still working on it? He's talks like that, he doesn't touch it.
hey,
Like, you can't, you don't wanna fail, cause you're. Are you gonna throw these out?
Um,
I'm gonna keep them for something.
yeah.
If you're gonna throw them out, I'll keep them, if not, you keep them. Oh, are you still recording?
I don't think I gotta keep them, so do, well,
Put
do
them
something.
on my